Welcome, welcome. Ethereum 2033 panel with some awesome panelists. We'll do a brief round of introductions and then jump right into it.
Yeah, so I'm Carsten from the Cartesi Foundation. Sorry?
Yo guys, I'm gonna ask you guys to stop talking so loud, please. I'm sorry to be that guy, but it's so loud and we can't even hear our panelists. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I'm Carsten from the Cartesi Foundation, and I love everything about verifiable computing and making strange things that connect to Ethereum. Turn it on.
Perfect. Okay. I'm Ben. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of Espresso. And I've been working in the blockchain space for a while as a researcher, and I'm generally excited about all topics. So, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Redford, the CEO and co-founder of Risk Zero, and we make general purpose ZK real.
Awesome, awesome. All right, to kick the panel off, kind of looking at the end game for Ethereum 9-10 years down the line, there's a lot to kind of think about. With the advent of a lot of these modular infrastructure pieces for the DA layer, for VM, and there's kind of this shift almost away from Ethereum, while simultaneously Ethereum is focusing on this, on the DA kind of part of their roadmap with the upcoming Denkun upgrade. So is the future of Ethereum a settlement layer? Is Ethereum just this secure layer of settlement, or is there a different future for Ethereum that is more than just a secure settlement layer for modular rollups?
Geez, that's a hard question to answer. I think that if you look at using ZK in particular to prove things that happen off-chain on Ethereum, then it's less of a settlement layer and more of an execution layer. So I do think that it's possible that things that people are pushing to L2s might happen more directly on Ethereum in the future, especially if they continue along this enshrinement route. But yeah, 13 years is a long time.
Yeah, I think in 15 years, we don't exactly know how Ethereum's going to look like. I think that it will be a trust anchor. I think it will be a community. I think, personally, that it's going to be changed around to kind of be optimized for all the things that happen on top of Ethereum. A little bit it might be in the future we have, let's say, a RISC-V, let's say, opcode or something like that pre-compile inside Ethereum to actually make some of these things easier, because frankly speaking, the EVM is not worth the trouble once in a while.
All right, so I actually really like this question. I told you it was a hardball question and only softball questions at this event, but I think Ethereum is a community. It's more than a protocol. It's an idea. I think that we see this with things like EigenLayer. Initially, Ethereum was a consensus protocol, right? And people would build applications on it. It was distinct from Bitcoin in the sense that it wasn't just an application, it was a platform where people could deploy applications. But now, when we have things like restaking, Ethereum has become something where you can even deploy protocols, right? You can get the Ethereum validators to run an alternative protocol. And that sort of erodes this idea of Ethereum as even a specific protocol. It's a community, it's an idea, and it has economic weight that can be added to protocols that are continuing to be designed. So in 10 years, we don't know exactly what protocol Ethereum will be running. Maybe consensus protocols will get much better. Maybe ZK proving will become 100 milliseconds or less. So, and I think this fits very well into the modular thesis too, because we have all these designs of systems, DA layers, alt-DA layers. We have the Espresso sequencer, the design of shared sequencing for rollups. These are being developed as protocols that are not enshrined in the Ethereum protocol, but they can effectively become part of Ethereum as long as the community adopts it. So Ethereum is a community, and that will continue to be its role. into the future.
Some would call that a based answer. So earlier on a panel at the Avail event, there was this question about EVM, and I'm going to pose it to you guys as well, which is, what is the state of the EVM in the next year? And then, what is the state of the EVM perhaps in 10 years?
I think the fantastic thing about the EVM is that we are getting closer and closer, especially thanks to technologies like, let's say, RISC-0, that we don't actually need to care that much about the EVM anymore. It's just like this ugly stepchild that we just have to deal with once in a while. And we can basically just verify off-chain computation with ZK and so on quite easily. So it's going to end up with that basically there's a typical set of kind of like instructions that we're doing to kind of verify a ZK stock or in the stock. And that's basically most of the time what we're actually using things for. So one of the things that ZK really enables, and let's say roll-ups in this particular case, is to go out and, let's say, break away from that story. So the EVM will be basically, I mean, it's just basically going to get stagnated, in my opinion, because it doesn't attract more developers, but the things that are built on top of Ethereum will attract developers.
I mean, I think the EVM in 1 year is going to be very much like the EVM right now. Hopefully it will support a couple new pre-compiles like Groth 16 and things like this. And the EVM in 10 years, I mean, if you look at the amount of code and the sort of ecosystem that's built up on top of the EVM, I don't think it's going anywhere. Now, might some layer underneath it exist that is maybe more expressive and more extensible, and I think that's kind of what Ben's going to get.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Brian here. There's a strong network effect around the EVM already, just because of the fact that Ethereum mainnet. I mean, basically the future of the EVM, I think, is pretty much the future of Ethereum mainnet. Rollups have brought VM differentiation to the Ethereum space, and so I think that we could see a lot more transactions happening through alternative VMs that are not the EVM and that are settling to the Ethereum EVM. And so I generally agree with you.
And so the architectures for what you guys are building, Carsten, at Cartesi, as well as you with RISC-0 are both based on this RISC-V VM design. And kind of one of the things that excites me the most about this alternative VM idea is this onboarding of developers. But I think what excites you guys more is the technical flexibilities and the different capabilities that are kind of part of this stack. So let's kind of dive into why you guys are working with RISC-V and kind of what that enables you guys at a core programming level for your devs and also for the users.
I think that the benefit of using something like the RISC-V instruction set is basically, like, this is going to sound horrible, but we can externalize problems of things like compilers, tooling, let's say documentation, bug fixes to the existing RISC-V ecosystem, right? We don't need to build our own compilers, we don't need to build our own languages, we don't need to build our own, let's say, test cases for this stuff. It just works, and we can test our own implementations against that. That's the benefit of RISC-V.
Yeah, we were attracted to RISC-V because of its sort of openness. It has a lot of tests built in. It has a formal specification, unlike the EVM. And specifically, it does let you onboard developers much faster because you can meet them where they are. And while the EVM has all of these years and millions and billions of dollars of investment, like programming writ large has a much, much bigger investment. So if we're really going to bring blockchain technology to the world at large, we're going to need to be able to run Java programs in a blockchain context. And you can see Cartesi doing a bunch of that. We're obviously doing it in a ZK manner. And RISC-V, it makes the most sense relative to, like, ARM requires a license, MIPS is kind of old, so it just makes sense if you're going to leverage the broadest possible set of developer work.
Right. Get a little bit more of a spicy one. I think a lot of people are aiming for this idea of roll-up interoperability where users are interacting with applications across a wide set of rollups without caring what chain they're on, or at least that's the idea that's been pushed. But then simultaneously, we have rollups like Blast and others that push these mechanisms to get as much ETH on their chain as possible and keep it as sticky as possible. So the idea of them wanting to forego this ETH onto other chains and kind of have this world is potentially a little bit misaligned. And this goes, I've got the Arbitrum socks on, it goes for Arbitrum, it goes for all of the rest. Is there a bit of a misalignment when it comes to this idea of chain abstracting user experience and then also kind of roll-ups as a brand kind of missing out on their piece of the pie?
Yeah, I'll take this. So I think you could ask the same question about why are rollups allowing other applications to build their own chains within their own ecosystems. You could say that, well, the original rollup plan was to just build your own rollup, mainnet Arbitrum, mainnet Optimism, etc. And then applications will deploy, and then all the value is captured by your chain because applications are deploying on your rollup. So why are they starting to enable other applications to come and build their own chains within their ecosystem, right? And the answer is because that's what the market wants. Applications want to build their own chains. And there's competition between rollups for market share. And so to survive as a rollup today, you need to become an SDK and not just a rollup. And so the same thing is going to apply to interoperability. If you don't enable interoperability, then in face of competition with other rollups, you will become irrelevant. Now there's still a game of building the best SDK, and there are unique advantages to some of these ecosystems, like ZK rollups versus optimistic rollups. They have their own unique advantages, and even within each ecosystem, if you look at ZK rollups, they have different choices, technical choices that they're making. And so rollups really need to excel at being the best stack for a rollup, but not, some of them may gate themselves, but there's a natural market desire for access to liquidity that's outside of that ecosystem, and that they're going to have to respond to.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a misalignment, honestly. One of the amazing things about blockchain is that it provides this alternate funding mechanism. An alternate funding mechanism for outside of standard venture capital, for instance. And a lot of the ability to leverage that right now seems to be in building this community and the sort of network that is highly localized. So it doesn't surprise me to see things like Blast and people honestly not that excited about aggregating their liquidity because it takes away some of their uniqueness. And so I think as blockchain continues to evolve and we invent newer governance structures that work, then we might see more interoperability. But for now, yeah, I think for some applications it's just you want to build your community on your chain.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up to that is there's an ongoing saying of we're entering a 10,000 roll-up future. I'm curious to hear your takes with regards to how this could play out. Is it kind of there's a couple winners that take most? Is it an evenly distributed spread with this chain abstracted user experience? Is there one or two that take all? What are your thoughts with regards to the 10,000 roll-up concept, and how does this value kind of be distributed?
So I think that it's not going to be, let's say, 10,000 roll-ups. I think it's going to be, let's say, more like 1 million roll-ups in practice, because of things like, let's say, shared sequencing and so on. It makes it so easy to actually go out there and actually deploy something new. And I think that it will be more about kind of what technologies do people pick. How does, let's say, how's the ease of people getting things into, let's say, sequencer blocks and so on. And yeah, and I think that's more about kind of like how this actually will play out. It will play out in ease. It will play out in ease of development, deployment, and in general about how easily can the user experience become.
Okay, so the 10,000, yeah?
10,000. Yeah, I said a million.
A billion. I don't know if there are a billion applications yet, but a million. Whatever the number is, the 10,000 number comes from let's say the number of applications, right? So if there's going to be hundreds of thousands of applications, then you have to look at it from the perspective of an application. If you're an application, do you become your own rollup, or do you deploy to an existing rollup? I think that rollups are starting to become synonymous with applications, right? Rollups are really applications that support other applications. So what's the advantage of being a general purpose application where other applications can deploy to? There are always going to be advantages to being in the same execution environment. The composability that you get from things like shared sequencing or bridges it's not exactly the same as the composability you get from being in the same execution environment. And then it's going to come down to an application by application basis of whether the type of interoperability or asynchronous interoperability that you get on your own is good enough for your use case, right? All things set aside, you'd rather be your own chain than be on somebody else's chain. Economically, it makes more sense for you. It makes more sense in terms of also keeping your pricing, at least the gas pricing of your rollup independent from the gas pricing of other rollups. So the natural tendency is for every application to have its own rollup. What's going to, I would say, restrict the number of rollups so that the number of rollups isn't exactly equal to the number of applications is this additional benefit that comes from synchronous composability among certain applications, and those will be part of the same rollup.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that, maybe there's 10,000 applications, but maybe in some instances it makes sense for a single game of, say, Counter-Strike to be its own rollup. So in a world where you really have to look at the state, what state you need to share with whom and when, and there's definitely a world where L3s and L4s represent, a single game or a single hand in a particular game. So yeah, maybe there's 10,000, maybe there's a million, maybe there's a billion.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is Solana going to take Ethereum's cake or not?
Well, I heard there's a trend of other L1s moving to become rollups on Ethereum, so that might be the future of Solana. In fact, it would be a very nice roll-up on Ethereum.
I mean, I hear they have a lot of competition from Avalanche right now in terms of halting, so, I don't know.
Carson has no answer. It's probably better that way. So, to kind of go deeper on this interoperability conversation, right? So we've each of you guys have established the thesis. 1 million rollups, application-specific rollups, and then L3s, L4s, and various different types of app-specific use cases to control your execution environment. Many apps that we'll see, notably GMX recently, even are launching their own rollup to have that kind of control over their execution environment. So Ben, with Espresso, with shared sequencing, with other interoperability solutions, how do we put these Lego pieces together? We've got all these chains, we've got all these different places where users can interact, and right now for us, we have to go bridge. We have to go to a bridge and do the whole thing. But that can't be the future of interacting on chain. So what is your vision for how this could look?
It's all about reduced risk. So what a shared sequencer does is it reduces the risk of bridging with very low latency, right? It reduces the risk of the types of synchronous interactions that can be enabled by other actors in the ecosystem, like builders, right? So a shared sequencer you can think of it as a marketplace through which different rollups are basically selling block space to actors that can take advantage of joint block space to and offer promises to users of what it will do with that joint block space. And ultimately, this just translates to, an experience that's as close as possible to being one chain while still being many, many sovereign chains. Fundamentally, you need to preserve the sovereignty and independence of these execution environments. And you could have bridges today that have extremely low latency, but it's just that they would carry extremely high risk. So it's all about reducing that risk and enabling more market efficiency.
Yeah. Kind of a bit of a broader one. I think the state of crypto right now, especially with kind of being a lot of early adopters, is quite ideologically driven, right? Like I asked a question about Solana, and you guys have quick answers as to why, chain halts, this and that. So there's kind of like this loyalty to certain communities, to certain networks for a variety of reasons. But I think for the users that come in from 2024 to 2033, or even just the next 5 years, they likely won't carry that same ideological baggage, some could say. So what is the difference in preferences of users who don't have this kind of, I like this chain because of these design choices? What does that kind of user look like, and how are you guys planning to care to that person or provide an experience for that type of person on chain?
I'm not sure I agree. I kind of think that, there's tons of sports teams and everybody loves their particular sports team. And yeah, I was giving Solana shit a second ago, but it's an amazing chain in and of itself. And I don't really think there's going to be this winner takes all thing. Everybody's trying to win, win, win. But I think realistically, people like diversity. People like to, have their in group. And if it's everybody in the world, it kind of loses anything special about it. So I think we might be overfitting to the Web 2 world when translating to some future where there isn't as much diversity. There might be more. It's just how can we surface this to people and make it useful and interesting to them.
Yeah, so I think that let's say sorry? Yeah, sorry, my voice is very low sometimes. But I think in general, the app developer always knows best what he actually wants. Like, it might be some app developers want, let's say, the speedy confirmations or something like the Solana chain. They might want, let's say, more deeper security for some things. And I think we just need to give them the choices, and they'll make the right ones. I don't think it needs to be tribal in this regard, but we need to make it easier for them to make the choices.
Yeah, just to add to that, developers like variety. I mean, there's so many languages, and yes, there are popular ones, but it ebbs and flows, and people still write COBOL. So,
Yeah, I think people like feeling part of a small community within a larger community. There's just something very natural about that, and I think that is just echoing what both of you said. That it's about diversity of the product too, but it's also about feeling like you have, you're connected to some smaller group of people, and so I think we'll continue to have this community diversity. I think what we need to look at doing is to, increase interoperability between these different communities, because ultimately that's where the value of Web3 is in. It's in unity. Right, and as distinct from Web 2, where you have a lot of diverse, applications and choices, but maybe they're monopolized, and that's something Web 3 does, is try to prevent monopolization, but it doesn't try to prevent unity. Right, the idea that if one application and another application are built by two different people who never connected with each other and never tried to integrate with each other, those things can just naturally interact with each other.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is how are we, I think, and that's something that all 4 of these projects share, how are we addressing that from the way we're building our products? And it's really by trying to interoperate with the biggest possible set of developers and blockchains. We're very committed to the Ethereum ecosystem, but our technology is very stack neutral, and Bitcoin rollups are being built on top of us. And I think trying to be as neutral as possible and just be where the developers want you to be.
Yeah. So, kind of a whole different tangent. As a result of Ethereum's vertical kind of scaling, right, with having Ethereum as the main settlement layer for all these rollups, there's a bit of a situation here where when we're onboarding people to Ethereum, they're not necessarily coming to Ethereum, right? There's Optimism, there's Arbitrum, there's ZK Sync, there's all these different, there's Cortezi, there's Resiro, there's all these different ecosystems that are possible to kind of come and interact with on-chain. And I'm kind of curious how you guys are thinking about this from like a onboarding user's perspective. Like, we have these different kind of verticals where people can come into the Ethereum ecosystem, but it's a little bit overwhelming perhaps for somebody who's new. How can we make it easier? How can we onboard people to rollups and have it feel all part of the Ethereum experience?
I mean, I think that if you look across the Ethereum ecosystem writ large, certain chains are doing a really good job of onboarding specific users into their environment. I think Starkware is doing a great job with gaming and things like this. So from our perspective, at least, we're kind of outsourcing that problem to people higher up the stack, and we just want to enable them to have the best technology they can and focus on their kind of local communities. Because I really think a lot of it comes down to, geography to some extent, and what your friends know.
Yeah, I'm gonna just push back a little bit on the question, which is that I think that when it comes to people joining the space, and whether it should feel like they're part of Ethereum, or whether it should feel like they're part of something else, like Cartesi or Optimism or ZK Sync, we should dissect the different parts of a user's experience. If you're building an application and your SDK is Cartesi, maybe that it should feel like Cartesi, right? What makes it feel like Ethereum is the fact that if somebody else builds an application that doesn't use Cartesi, but uses Optimism, you shouldn't have to worry about that, right? You should just think about which rollup SDK is my favorite rollup SDK, who am I going to go through, what's best for my experience as a developer, and not have to worry about the caveats. Not have to worry that, by building through Optimism, I'm now isolated from ZK Sync, or building. You don't have to, as a developer, you don't want to have to take bets on who's going to win these network effects. You don't want to have to take those bets. You just want to look at the product in front of you and evaluate it without having to act like a venture capitalist, right? And so that's what being part of Ethereum needs to feel like. It needs to be that there's no downside to choosing this stack over that stack other than what's right in front of you. You don't have to make predictions about the future. And that's what it means for all these rollups to really be part of Ethereum while providing differentiated experiences to developers.
Yeah, I think that basically when it comes to app developers, especially in the modular space, it's not just about, let's say something is Cartesi. It might be Cartesi is the entry point, but it might be that some issues you're having, for example, is let's say over in the Espresso community. It might be that some things you're dealing with is let's say liquidity access, for example, with things like Ethereum, for your bridging and so on. And I think that it all comes down to essentially, what is the Ethereum vision in this particular case? What are we trying to push here? I think that all of what we're doing is basically just more vehicles towards making this Web3 vision and the world computer and so on much more, let's say, available to people and actually able to use it.
Interesting takes. I know that we touched on the app chain thesis a bit, and I'd like to kind of circle back on that. I think that there's quite a bit of focus here amongst each of your projects. So what is the app chain thesis versus the general purpose thesis? And if a builder is like, I'm worried about interoperability and composability with other applications, that we're going to kind of be a siloed island, kind of what's the response?
I think that, let's say, the app chain, experience is the right direction in general, because it's like, even, let's say, a website doesn't exist in a vacuum normally. It always, let's say, goes up, for example, getting particular scripts from other websites and so on. It always sits in a context, right? And I think that with things like shared sequencing and so on, or block builders, basically the whole thing about, let's say, that it's not, let's say, one rollup that does everything. it basically all compresses together, because in the end of the day, it's all about you want to make things happen at the same time or in synchrony and so on instead. So I don't see let's say a big problem in letting people develop their own app chains, because it's just like many people have their own smart contracts today. Why aren't they basically small servers themselves?
My answer is kind of a cop-out. I don't know, like this technology is still pretty young, and I think it could go either direction. We don't know. Maybe somebody will invent, or an L1 that is just perfect for everyone to do everything. That seems really unlikely to me, but it could happen. So I think the users are going to dictate whether app chains or like mega L2s or L1s win, but probably I would put more money on app chains right now.
Good. I would say it's not users actually, but developers. So this goes back to what I answered earlier on a different question. That when a developer builds an application today, right? All else being equal, it's better to build your own chain. Right? It's very easy to do it. These SDKs make it easy. You can capture all your sequencing revenue, even if you join a shared sequencer. Shared sequencers have this, like when we're designing a shared sequencer at Espresso, we can't design something where we capture all the revenue. We have to kick it back to the rollups. So you have better revenue capture. You have just overall more control. The pricing, the gas fees of your application are now independent from congestion on other applications. Everything points to building your own chain. The downside is interoperability, and specifically synchronous composability. And we're never going to get to the composability that two applications within the same virtual machine have through shared sequencing. We'll get close, but there's always going to be risk priced in. There's always going to be some asynchrony, some delay. There's always caveats. So I think what we'll see is clusters of applications that really need that frequent interaction, and not just asynchronous frequent interaction that's low latency, but very tight integration. Maybe there will be, for example, several applications, and then like a flash loan provider that will be on the same rollup as these other applications and can facilitate liquidity where needed. And that's what I think we'll see the future, where the natural tendency is to build your own application, but there will be some clusters of applications that are on the same rollup.
I know we were supposed to have somebody from Eigenlayer on the panel. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but I'd still like to talk about this concept of kind of shared economic security and deriving consensus from a separate set of validators other than your own. Maybe we can kind of just dive into kind of why this is important for the space generally, and kind of what use cases are most exciting for you that you've seen or that you can think of with regards to Eigenlayer and this kind of restaking.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I mean, I'm extremely excited about restaking. It's that's something that Espresso, as a shared sequencer, is a core part of our design, is to take advantage of restaking. So let me maybe start by saying, where does this come from in the first place? What is staking important for? So if you have a protocol and you want to secure this protocol, then there's two types of security that you can get. Honest majority, where you're trusting that the majority of some set of people are honest, and it requires a high level of coordination to break the security. Or economic security, right? That if this could be provided by one party, it could be one centralized party, but just has a huge economic stake behind the protocol, and if it causes some security violation, then it's going to lose all that money. And then we have the combination of them. Ethereum really provides the combination. In order for Ethereum to violate its security promises, it would require not only a huge amount of collateral to be sacrificed, but also a high level of coordination, because there's at least 12,000 validators. If you look at all the validators that are actively participating, who would need to coordinate. Maybe fewer than 12,000 if we just look at the amount of stake needed to. That's a whole other rabbit hole. We're not going to go down that. But so why Eigenlayer? Why restaking? Well, the fact of the matter is, there's a tremendous amount of of economic security already in Ethereum. So if you're creating a new protocol, it's really good to give a subsidy to those who are already participating in Ethereum and have already staked their collateral for participating in Ethereum to then participate in your protocol too. It's mainly a subsidy, right? If you were able to just bootstrap a network and grow it and be like, Solana and any of these other protocols and go play the L1 playbook from scratch, build up a validator set in a community that has as much economic security as Ethereum, then that might be fine. But because there's this option of basically just creating a subsidy for this community that already exists to then lend its economic security to your protocol, that's the main value in EigenLayer. The second thing is if you're building a service for Ethereum, then there's an added advantage to having an overlap between the parties that are securing Ethereum and the parties that are securing your protocol. And this has nothing to do with economic security. This has to do more with the honest majority. So if you create a subsidy that gets every single one of the 12,000 validators who are participating in Ethereum to participate in your shared sequencer, your DA layer, or whatever it may be, the security of your protocol from an honest majority perspective is equivalent to Ethereum. So that summarizes my perspective.
I think one of the most amazing things about, let's say, EigenLayer and restaking is the fact that we can deliver a much better experience in terms of, like, let's say, bridging and finality to some extent for many different applications. Or let's say, for example, let's say if you want to follow, let's say, 10,000 rollups and follow what's the latest state of it, I'm perfectly happy to kind of like take a sample of, let's say, a strong high economic security network saying that, well, this is the truth, right? Because at the end of the day, like most of us running around at the moment, let's say trusting Infura, for example, to say what's the latest state of the Ethereum chain. Like I should be able to trust, let's say, a network of, let's say, subset of Ethereum validators instead to tell me what's the latest state of my Ethereum chain, layer 2 chains, different app chains instead. And I think that basically like this is where that it allows us to bootstrap these networks that are practical, but from a business perspective are not necessarily that sexy.
Yeah, I would just say that I think of like restaking as providing sort of a laboratory environment that can kind of be bolted onto Ethereum where people can test out new ideas that would have been too capital intensive to even think about trying before. Like, bootstrapping Cosmos cost a ton of money and it's been a mixed experiment. And I think the ability to just take a bunch of people who are already doing all of this staking and operating all the infrastructure and have all the risk models built up, it's basically just a way to leverage people who are already there, distribute your idea, see if it gets traction rather than trying to change Ethereum, because Ethereum has to change through a slow arc because it's Ethereum. So I just view EigenLayer as a really exciting opportunity for people to test out what's really possible in blockchain without so much overhead.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it seems like trying to launch a new L1 and bootstrap all your community infrastructure tooling in a post-EigenLayer world doesn't make much sense. Like, am I missing something?
Yeah, Ethereum, and this is what I said earlier, Ethereum becomes a platform not for applications, but for protocols. Yeah. Right? Ethereum is no longer a protocol, it's a community, it's an asset, it's a huge collection of economic stake that can be used to secure protocols. That's the future of Ethereum.
Yeah, who knows? It might also be that the existence of EigenLayer makes it much easier to start L1s because now all these node operators are familiar with a bunch of different technologies rather than just one node. Who knows?
Well, if you build an L1 using EigenLayer, are you an L1?
Well, that comes down to the question becomes like, how do you define an L1? And then we just run in circles.
You're an L1 star.
Yeah. So generally, I don't hear anything with regards to any worries about restaking. Even though that I've seen quite a bit on Twitter and on various sources about, worried about excessive restaking, that really didn't come up from any of you guys.
I think that basically because EigenLayer is picking this very strong, let's say almost semi-whitelisting approach to kind of like onboarding AVSs with security audits and so on. Like of course, things will possibly go wrong with some things, but at the same time, they're still trying to back it with kind of like with the slashing community, I think they're calling it. So it's quite safe, but I also think that because of this whitelisting in this particular case, it will diverge diverge towards much more, let's say, general purpose, let's say AVSs and eigenlayer, like let's say, for example, Espresso or Linux coprocessor and so on. And it's not going to be so much the experimental angle of eigenlayer as we hoped it would be.
Yeah, well, I guess I've been talking mostly about the wonderful advantages of restaking, but the one credible pushback on restaking that I've heard, and Vitalik touches on this in his post on Don't Overload Ethereum's social consensus. And this social consensus idea of Ethereum is probably the most nebulous aspect of Ethereum. It's a thing that people like talk about, but it's not very concrete. It's like kind of out there, like, oh, what happens if things go wrong? What happens if actually the consensus protocol is taken over by like a very powerful nation-state actor, and we actually do have reorgs that go beyond 15 minutes in Ethereum and shit breaks. Then there's this idea that, well, Ethereum is ultimately a community and can come together and decide on what things should really be. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's true. I mean, that's what makes, it's like, oh, well, the community, right? But there's something really powerful behind that. It is the community. And so is the community going to come up and take a vote and reorg when some application through eigenlayer breaks? That's the question, right? And I think that's the pushback, that if you start building applications that assume that you will have the social consensus of Ethereum also behind you, then that's not only risky, but also, it could be the case that somebody builds a very valuable application and that does get the attention of social consensus, and then there's sort of a question I don't have the answer to, which is that a good thing or a bad thing? Right? If some application were deployed on top of Ethereum through eigenlayer, and it were to cause the community to reorg Ethereum because this application had a bug in it, would that be considered good or bad? Right? Maybe you can think of this application through eigenlayer as an extension of Ethereum. If it has more value than Ethereum itself, then this should happen. Right? That is Ethereum. The future of Ethereum is unknown. But if you think that no, the Ethereum main protocol should always have the priority, and we shouldn't allow just anyone to build another protocol that has a bug in it and then causes social consensus to reorg Ethereum, then this is not a good thing. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that the risks primarily like similar to the sort of housing collapse that happened in America, right? If a bunch of people start restaking and then people start re-restaking or three-staking or four-staking, and some of these, if there's like cross-network effects inside this like network of AVSs, then maybe you'll get some kind of cascading collapse. So I do think people need to pay attention to how these systems are interacting with each other, but I think it's going to have to be the community that does it, and it seems kind of far-fetched to me. It seems like there's going to be a lot of diversity in the sort of pool of restakers. So.
Okay, wait. Before we move on, I just want to push a little bit back on this, because there is something that there is a criticism of restaking that I've heard a lot, which is maybe not exactly what you're saying, but that they does touch on the housing market crash, and so there's a saying that restaking is over collateralization, and I disagree with that. The argument goes, well, if you take $1 billion network and then another $1 billion network and you stack it onto Ethereum, then now you're using the same amount of economic value to secure $2 extra billion. And then maybe you go from $2 extra billion to $30 billion extra dollars. Well, when you add $30 billion of value to Ethereum's stake, the value of Ethereum goes up, right? Because the value of Ethereum is proportional to the value of applications on top of Ethereum. The value of Ether reflects the expected revenue that a staker will get from the applications that are on it. So if you add applications, and you can make the same argument about applications. I mean, if building a protocol through eigenlayer is like over collateralization, and so is Uniswap, right? Uniswap brings a tremendous amount of value to Ethereum, and it's leveraging Ethereum consensus, right? But Uniswap increases the value of Ether. So I don't agree with this over collateralization argument. Maybe that's not exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, I think I was more saying that if there's a protocol bug in a particularly popular protocol on EigenLayer and it happens to be used by a bunch of other protocols, and then somebody gets slashed and you get like cascading slashing, then you might end up in some kind of economically fraught situation. But yeah, I totally agree.
I think what you'd end up with is if the validators of Ethereum are participating in many other protocols, then their action in one of these protocols, which may have a bug, they didn't do anything wrong, causes them to be slashed, and that causes some very arbitrary redistribution of the staking power of Ethereum. I don't necessarily think that's so bad. I mean, it's not clearly something doesn't necessarily go wrong when you redistribute stake. When it gets slashed, it just kind of gets redistributed to everyone equally in some sense. But it is something to think about. Yeah.
All right, guys, we just have time for one quick last question. The Denkun upgrade for Ethereum is coming, I think, March 13th, also known as EIP 4844. What kind of cost reductions can we expect on Ethereum rollups in a world post Denkun?
I didn't catch the last thing you said.
What kind of cost reductions can we expect in a world of Ethereum post this upgrade?
Post 4844.
Yes.
Well, I guess I can take this one. Like, I think that essentially, if you're looking at, let's say, something like Espresso or Celestia and so on in terms of like data availability, it's much more, let's say, sexier for rollups than, let's say, the prototype sharding as it is today, because it's quite limited. And the space that exists in the blob space of the Ethereum chain right now, it's going to be filled up by, let's say, Optimism and Arbitrum. They're going to compete for it. They're going to pay high prices. What I think will be a benefit is that they'll give you this point evaluation pre-compile in the Ethereum, which makes it a lot easier, for example, to integrate things like, for example, let's say Espresso in this particular case for optimistic rollups. But the costs are not going to go to, let's say, the 10,000 rollups. The cost benefits are not going to go to the 10,000 rollups. The cost benefits are going to go to the major rollups instead.
Yeah, so do you want to go ahead? No, okay. So cost reduction for rollups post 4844. So 4844 it's not quite dank sharding yet. And so it doesn't really tremendously increase the data capacity of a block, but it's separating out it's sort of separating the markets for execution space and just block space, which is like the first obvious step towards improving the pricing situation, because it may be the case that there's plenty of space in the Ethereum block and it's not at all congested in terms of just its data content. It just happens to be congested in terms of its gas prices, and the gas prices are now, because there's one uniform gas pricing model, causing a spike as well in the marginal price of adding another byte to the block. Right, so I should be able to add a byte to the block that's not causing any additional execution if the execution is saturated, but there's still space in the block. So that's a great idea, and it's going to improve the situation. Ultimately, we need to increase the data capacity of blocks tremendously in order to bring down the costs to support sort of the growing ecosystem of applications. I think this will be enabled through dank sharding to a certain degree. It's never. I don't think even through dank sharding it's going to be at the level that alt DA systems like Espresso DA, like Polygon of Veil, like EigenDA, maybe like Celestia too, are enabling. It's hard to predict, of course. But on the other hand, rollups are making their own choices just for their own security of whether they want to use Ethereum for data availability or not. And so the choice of being a rollup or a Validium is going to put you on some point in the spectrum of security and performance and low cost.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that I think hopefully it smooths out some of the spikes that happen in when L2 demand goes really high or something like this. But ultimately, yeah, it's really going to just open up more opportunity for developers to experiment with Ethereum block space. So I think it's just like keeping up with the growth of Ethereum, and that's about it.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. Let's give a good round of applause for our panelists. Thanks, guys.